Crowd this year. We're delighted to see all of you here. You know, it was, I think, 6 years ago that we did a summer program on the Colorado River, and when my staff and I were sitting around trying to decide what to cover for this year's conference, we kept coming back to the Colorado River, and we kept saying, well, everybody does the Colorado River. We just did the Colorado River 6 years ago. Should we really do the Colorado River again? But I think from the crowd that we've managed to attract for this year, it looks like we've made the right call. Many of you were with us last evening for the keynote address. If you weren't here, you missed a wonderful talk by Pat Mulroy. While Pat acknowledged some of the serious challenges that we face dealing with the Colorado River, she sounded a note of optimism, I thought. There was a real sense of hope that was born, I think, from her experience in dealing with people on the Colorado River trying to solve issues not in the courts but around the table. As I was reflecting a bit on Pat's comments last night, it called to mind sort of that famous quote from Wallace Stegner in a wonderful book that I'm sure many of you know about, The Sound of Mountain Water, a collection of Stegner's essays. Stegner said, "One cannot be pessimistic about the West. This is the native home of hope. When it fully learns that cooperation, not rugged individualism, is the quality that most characterizes and preserves it, then it will have achieved itself and outlived its origins. Then it has a chance to create a society to match its scenery." So this is going to be a great platform, I think, from which to launch this discussion over the next 2 days about the Colorado River. I know you're anxious for us to get started, but we also have a number of announcements I need to make before we get started, so let me begin by doing that. First, I want to note that we have 2 overflow rooms set aside upstairs. In both days we'll have an overflow room in room 206. There'll be a live feed into that room. If you need room to spread out or you just want to be able to relax a little bit, you can go to 206. There's a second room today in 207, tomorrow in 304 if you need an additional room. I want just to mention that at the break this morning, which I think is around 9:45, our students are going to have a table outside where they're going to give hats for a $10 donation to the Natural Resources Law Center. I forgot my hat this morning. It's up in my office. I was going to bring it and show you. There are some really nice Natural Resources Law Center hats, and we thought it might be a nice way for you to become more attached, if you will, to the Natural Resources Law Center. So stop by the table, buy a hat. They're really nice hats. No, we're supposed to have a barbecue lunch today out in the plaza. I'm going to be willing the sun to come out here in the next hour or so, so we're still planning to be on the plaza for lunchtime today, but we have set up a contingency plan upstairs in the cafe, so if the weather doesn't permit, we'll be upstairs in the cafe where we're going to have the barbecue lunch. One point about the lunch, you'll note from your program that it's sponsored by the Environmental Law Society. Each year, the Environmental Law Society sort of cooks our lunch and serves it to us. It's a wonderful way that we can tie in with the Environmental Law Society, and it's an opportunity for them to meet some of you, and I hope you'll take a moment to thank them and chat with them and talk with them about your experiences in the natural resources law field. I know that they would all appreciate that. Also, we're having a reception this evening along with a poster session. That will begin around 5 p.m., again, up in the cafe. The cafe, by the way, if you haven't found it, is really just right above us. So if you go up the first flight of stairs and then backtrack, you will find the cafe. Please remember to wear your badge to the reception. We have, it seems like every year the rules on alcohol at the university get harder to deal with, and this year they're extremely difficult to deal with. If you don't have a badge, you will not be served, I'm told, so please have your badge if you want a beer or a glass of wine. Okay, you probably noted already in your folders, if you didn't, there's wireless access for conference participants. The information about wireless access is in your packet, so feel free to use that service. If there's a problem, please let us know. Also, I should note that the PowerPoint slides that you see and a video of the whole conference broken out into sections, will be available on our website sometime probably in the next week or two. I can't make any guarantees about exactly when that's going to happen, but it is our plan to get those materials up on the website. Okay, I've got some people to thank, many people, of course, to thank for all the work that went into planning this conference. First, I want to thank Doug Kenny and Sarah Bates. They're here in the audience. Doug and Sarah, wave, say hi. Doug and Sarah really did the lion's share of the work in planning the program and in contacting all the people. And it was just great, I thought, that we were able to get the Upper Colorado River Basin Commission to have their meeting here yesterday and have that wonderful panel yesterday afternoon of all the federal officials talking about some of the work that they're doing that relates to the Colorado River Basin. So I think that's great. I also want to be sure to thank, and I hope you will remember to thank, all of the students and in particular Heidi Horton of our staff. Many of you, I'm sure, have had some contact with Heidi. She's the one that takes care of all the registration and all the logistics for this program. Heidi and the students came back, I think it was Tuesday morning, late Tuesday morning, they came back with 3 carloads worth of food and all kinds of things that they had to deal with. They have just been working around the clock for the last several days to make sure this conference goes off without a hitch. You'll notice Heidi and all the students have on their tags sort of a special bar across their name. Their name's in white and there's sort of a dark bar on it, so you'll notice who they are. If you have questions or problems, you should contact them, and I'm sure they'll try to help you. But please, before, are they all here, the students, and is Heidi here? I told her she better come in so we could thank her properly, but I don't see her. So anyway, let's thank them now, but maybe we'll have a chance to get Heidi in here to thank her properly again. She's taking care of business, I'm sure, so glad for that. Okay. All right, so we're going to begin. Before our keynote address from Mike Connor, we're going to start with just a short program by Doug Kenny. Most of you know Doug. He's the director of our Western Water Policy Project at the center. He's been at the center for many years as a senior research associate there, and he is in charge of our Colorado River Governance Initiative, which in some ways was the inspiration for this conference this year. As I mentioned, we did a program on the Colorado River about 6 years ago at our 2005 annual summer conference, and Doug thought it would be a good idea to sort of give you an update of what's been going on over the last 6 years on the Colorado River. So Doug?
Thanks, Mark. Yes, we did do a Colorado River Conference in 2005, and I know that because I organized that one. And to follow up on what Mark said, yes, I have been getting this question a lot the last couple months as to why are you doing another Colorado River Conference? And so I devoted a good 15 minutes of brainstorming to the answer. And the answer is a lot of things have happened. And this is just, again, this is my 15 minutes of brainstorming, and then I stopped. And so I probably missed some huge things that have happened. And I probably have the wrong dates for some of this stuff. But I thought it was rather remarkable that you could come up with a list of events that I think are key. We might disagree on some of these, whether they're important or not, but it's pretty easy to generate a big list of what's happened in the last 5 or 6 years on this basin. You know, the interim guidelines, the first thing mentioned there, get all the attention. But there's a lot of studies, a lot of other agreements, a lot of external events, from a recession to an earthquake, to a drought that continues except for in the headwaters this year, which is very welcomed, I'm sure, but still pretty extreme drought conditions through much of the southern part of this basin. And a fair number of personnel changes, I think, are important. I think a lot of people, once the interim rules were adopted, decided that would be a good time to get out of the game, or at least scale back a little bit. So we have a fair number of personnel changes, and of course a new administration since the last time we had a Colorado River Conference. So a lot of key things have gone on. Again, I'm sure I missed some huge ones here, and wouldn't it be difficult for this group to generate a list 10 times this long. But those are some of the things. 2 other things I wanted to mention, though. because I think they'll come up over the course of the next 2 days. And one is this idea that there is still very different opinions about climate change and how significant of an issue it is. And in particular, this survey I thought was interesting in that it shows from 2008 to 2010 there was really growing skepticism in the American public about the existence and the importance of climate change as an issue. And I've already, just in the last day, heard enough conversations from enough people to know that we're not all on the same page about where we're at in terms of climate change as an issue. And so that's going to come up several times, I think, today and tomorrow. The other thing, though, I wanted to point out was that when we met last time in 2005, the reservoirs in this basin pretty much were in free fall. 2005 was actually a little better than 2004, but nonetheless we were in a series of years there where the storage had dropped pretty sharply. And I think it's worth pointing out that since 2005, the total storage of mead, this is at Mead and Powell, has pretty much stayed stable. You know, we've had some significant losses in Mead, offset somewhat by gains in Powell, and those, and we'll get some balancing there here pretty soon. But by and large, the actions that have been taken in the last 6 years have stopped the free fall. That's the good news. The question, I think, then before us is how do we go from here? You know, and so that's really, I think, the jumping off point for our conversation today and tomorrow, and that perhaps it looks like we've stopped the free fall, but we have a lot of work to do, and so we really want to talk over the next 2 days about solutions and moving forward. So that's all I wanted to say. With that, Mark, where'd you go? Mark will introduce our first presentation.
Could we get maybe Mike and the two Pats to come up so we can be ready for the program? Has anybody seen Mike Connor? Oh, here he is. Okay. No, that's Pat. I'm sorry. Has anybody seen Mike Connor this morning? I haven't seen him yet.
Be happy to make his.
Maybe we won't start. Yeah. Hopefully he's here or nearby, so we can get started. I saw Pat Mulray in the back. Doug, can you go? He's coming? Oh, good. Okay, good. We're ready for you, Mike. Yeah, so. Sorry to sort of take you right by surprise.
It's your parking people that were...
Oh, is that what it is? Yeah, the parking gnomes, they get you every time. Hopefully none of you will get tickets. No, the parking and the alcohol policies have just gotten worse, I'm afraid, and I don't think that's going to change. Okay, sorry for that little hiccup. Let's get started, though. We're all looking forward, I think, to hearing from Mike Connor. He is, of course, the Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation. He's been preceded in that position by, of course, many high historical figures, I guess I would say, people with quite prominent reputations, Fred Newell, Elwood Mead, and, of course, the late Floyd Dominy. Floyd Dominy, of course, just died last year at the age of 100, perhaps the most famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, of our commissioners of reclamation. Mike has a long and distinguished career in public service. Before he became a reclamation commissioner, he spent 8 years as counsel to the Natural Resources Committee in the U.S. Senate. He was counsel to the subcommittee there on water rights. And he has previously served as deputy director and director of the Secretary's Indian Water Rights Commission, and before that worked in the Interior Solicitor's Office, both in D.C. and in Albuquerque. Mike began his career in the Solicitor's Honors Program in 1993. That just happens to be the place where I started my career as well, a few years before Mike was in that position. But I think Mike's most important credential is that he's a graduate of the University of Colorado Law School.
Oh, so. No, not that, no.
Mike was here, I think it was just a few days after he was sworn in as commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation. So he made his first official speech as commissioner right here in this courtroom. And we're just delighted to have you back today, Mike, to talk a little bit about some work at the commission. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Oh, and let me just mention that after Mike talks, we have two commentators. You met Pat Mulroy last night, of course, the general manager of the Southern Nevada water. Sorry, Pat. And then, of course, Pat Terrell, who's the Wyoming state engineer. So they'll
Southern Wyoming.
Southern Wyoming. Okay, very good. Mike.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. And I'm going to talk about collaboration on the Colorado River Basin. I don't think it's gone that far that Pat is being given responsibility over Colorado's water resources yet. I appreciate the very kind introduction. I know with the Colorado connections that exist at the Department of the Interior, I view myself as a hybrid. I play in the Colorado camp and I play in the New Mexico camp, and there's two large contingents in the department these days. Between those connections and the fact that it's summertime in Boulder, although it's hard to tell today, I know there's no shortages of volunteers for this duty is given a keynote, so I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm honored to be here at my alma mater. I'm a little intimidated to be here given the commentators that I see who are going to respond to my talk, and so in probably building upon my Senate experience, I might try and filibuster here. But Mark's, I think we've started a little earlier, so it might be a little tougher for me to take that much time. Several weeks ago, the ever-patient organizers of the conference pleaded with my staff, finally, to give them a title for my talk. So they came in to the office and said, you absolutely have to come up with a title, and so there it is, The Colorado River in the Era of Cooperation. Reflecting what I think are the recent successes that we have and hopefully the future successes that we're trying to accomplish here over the next couple of years. But to tell you the truth, until last week, I wasn't really quite sure what the broader message was that I wanted to give as part of this talk. I was happy to come here and talk about the various initiatives we have ongoing with the partnerships we have with the 7 basin states and other stakeholders in the basin. And I guarantee that between the recent successes and our hopes for the future, I could take a large amount of time just going through that. But last week, however, I think two experiences brought into context for me something special about the Colorado River and something unspecial about other places. So last Wednesday, I was in Tijuana for a binational meeting with many of the folks in this room to continue our ongoing discussions with Mexico and build upon the tremendous successes we had last year. We, and by we I mean the diverse interests represented at the meeting, certainly want to further to develop cooperative actions that will benefit both countries. There are some tough issues, but there is also no doubt in my mind that the preferred means to address them are through constructive engagement and active dialogue. On Thursday morning, however, after taking a red-eye flight back from San Diego from that very beautiful setting in Tijuana and those great discussions, I testified before the House Water and Power Subcommittee on H.R. 1837, the San Joaquin Valley Water Reliability Act. It's a bill that purports to address California's ongoing water crisis by, among other things, preempting California's historic 2009 bipartisan legislation, which established a balanced approach to addressing the serious water and environmental issues in the Sacramento River, San Joaquin River, Bay Delta region. 2, it would waive application of the Endangered Species Act by ignoring current science in favor of a 1994 agreement, the Bay Delta Accord, to define the operating conditions for federal and state projects taking water from the Bay Delta. And 3, it repeals a carefully crafted settlement on the San Joaquin River that ended 18 years of litigation and, once implemented, would restore a self-sustaining salmon fishery while promoting sound and predictable water management in the San Joaquin River. Needless to say, this bill is not about cooperation, nor is it about balance. It's about choosing winners and losers and dictating results from Washington, D.C. So why do I mention that experience at this Colorado River conference? Well, I had the pleasure last December of listening to Pat Mulroy address the Association of California Water Agencies. She gave an absolutely terrific speech, as she always does, and I'm sorry to have missed it last night. And one of the key points she made was that the Colorado River and the Bay Delta are connected by the 25 million people in Southern California that rely on both systems for their water supply. So what happens in one area influences what happens in other areas. And we know that's true with respect to water supply. Since 2000, when Southern California overall, committed to living within its Colorado River allocation of 4.4 million acre feet, the net result was increased reliance on exportation of water from the Bay Delta region. My broader concern is that the issues in California's Bay Delta region will have implications beyond just water supply for Southern California and the rest of the Colorado River region. The policy approach taken in H.R. 1837 is the attempt to use raw political power to resolve water disputes in a one-sided manner, and is a trend completely at odds with the approach being taken on the Colorado River over the last 15 plus years. From that standpoint, it should be wholly rejected, lest others in Washington, D.C. think that a one-sided approach that defies the collective will, as well as completely ignoring state sovereignty, should be the basis for the next era of federal water policy. I don't believe that's appropriate. Open and inclusive dialogue, as painful as it is at times, is the best approach for real and, more important, lasting solutions to even the most difficult of water issues. So let me focus on the Colorado River Basin and what's been accomplished over the last decade and a half, as well as what we hope to accomplish in the next couple of years. As everyone knows, it's not as if cooperation is easy in the Colorado River Basin. As Mark Reisner noted in Cadillac Desert, quote, "The Colorado River's modern notoriety stems not from its wild rapids and plunging canyons, but from the fact that it is the most legislated, most debated, and most litigated river in the entire world. It also has more people, more industry, and a more significant economy dependent on it than any other comparable river in the world." I think most debated still applies. However, most litigated, I'm going to shift the title now to the Bay Delta region. And that shift is a credit to a lot of the people in this room. So why is it most debated? Maybe it's just inertia. Maybe that's the way it's always been. But as Pat Terrell, in one of our early meetings after we came in office, I think didn't warn us, he advised us, that there is no Colorado River issue too small for the basin states to debate. I think, but I'm not going to attribute it because I don't have 100% memory. I think Pat said to whine about. But we're going to elevate it to debate. Seriously, a quick review of the interest dependent on the river make it clear why there's such a high interest. The Colorado River provides water for irrigation of more than 4 million acres of land in the U.S. and Mexico, and a municipal industrial supply for approximately 30 million people in the basin. Supplies irrigation and domestic water for 15 Native American tribes. It runs through several hydroelectric plants and generates more than 6 billion kilowatt hours of energy annually. It provides unparalleled water-based recreation opportunities, including 7 national wildlife refuges, 4 national recreational areas, and 5 national parks. And of course, it provides increasingly important and critical fish and wildlife habitat. To better understand and quantify the interests at stake, Reclamation recently evaluated the economic value of its program and its mission. In the Colorado River Basin alone, we estimate that the value of our programs is approximately $4.4 billion annually. That's the hydropower we generate, the irrigation water, the M&I water, and the recreation benefits. Those programs contribute over $7.2 billion in annual economic output, and they support almost 51,000 jobs on an annual basis. And let me make it clear, that's a very conservative estimate. That doesn't take off all the spin-off industrial output that's available because of the water and power reclamation provides. Specific to the river, the Secretary of the Interior is vested with the responsibility for managing the use of the mainstream waters in the lower Colorado River Basin, and he carries out these responsibilities consistent with that sacred tablet of documents, agreements, treaties, statutes, etc., known as the law of the river. In carrying out those responsibilities for the Secretary, Reclamation's goals are to promote certainty and sustainability in Colorado River operations. Most important to those goals are creating a set of tools that provide much needed flexibility in managing the erratic flows in the river, and ultimately provide for long-term predictability for all water users in the basin. Flexibility and predictability are fundamental to good water management. As I mentioned, there's been great success over the past 15 years in developing important new management tools. In 1999, Reclamation collaborated with the lower basin states on the off-stream storage rule, which allowed Colorado River water from one state to be stored off-stream in another state for future recovery. To date, approximately 700,000 acre-feet has been stored under this rule. In January 2001, the department published the interim surplus criteria, which also provided the framework for California's 4.4 plan, and led to the 2003 quantification settlement agreement among Imperial Irrigation District, the Coachella Valley Water District, and the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. The QSA quantifies each party's share of California's apportionment of Colorado River water to facilitate transfers among the parties. The QSA also provides a framework for several other agreements that were executed concurrently among these and other California parties to implement other conservation actions and to allocate that conserved water. The QSA water transfers will continue for 75 years, and they're quite frankly central and most important to California's efforts to live within its 4.4 million acre-feet apportionment under the Colorado River Compact. But of course, perhaps the most historic achievement over the past 15 years was the agreement among the 7 states on the 2007 Colorado River Interim Guidelines for lower basin shortages and coordinated operations for Lake Powell and Lake Mead. In addition to providing coordinated operations between the 2 reservoirs, the interim guidelines defined for the first time how water shortages in the lower basin would be allocated based on Lake Mead elevation. The interim guidelines also implemented the important intentionally created surplus mechanism, which allows lower basin water users to take extraordinary actions to conserve water and store that water in Lake Mead for future recovery. The ICS mechanism of the interim guidelines has proven quite useful and led to collaboration between Reclamation, Metropolitan Water District, CAWCD, and the Southern Nevada Water Authority in building Brock Reservoir, just north of the All-American Canal and west of the Coachella Canal. Construction of this $172 million reservoir was funded by non-federal partners in return for ICS credits. This regulating reservoir stores 8,000 acre-feet, and we're projecting that it will allow us to save an average of 70,000 acre-feet of water per year that otherwise would have flowed to Mexico and not been available for use within the United States. Shifting to the environment. As all of you know, an increasing sensitivity and desire to address long-neglected environmental needs has become a major factor in addressing the long-term sustainability of the Colorado River resource. 3 great examples of federal and state agencies working cooperatively to resolve difficult endangered species issues are located in the basin, including the Upper Colorado River Endangered Fish Recovery Program, the San Juan River Basin Recovery Implementation Program, and of course the Lower Colorado River Multi-Species Conservation Program. These 3 programs are coordinated, comprehensive, long-term multi-agency efforts to conserve and work towards the recovery of endangered species and protect and maintain wildlife habitat on the Colorado River. They are producing tangible results that should yield broad environmental benefits for years to come. Salinity is another environmental issue where a strong federal, state, local partnership has yielded significant results. By implementing cost-shared projects and working through the Colorado River Basin Salinity Forum, salinity damages in the lower basin have been substantially reduced over time from an estimated $650 million per year to these days about $350 million annually. Salinity concentrations at Imperial Dam have been reduced by approximately 136 parts per million. The Grand Canyon, of course, is a significant consideration in our operations of Glen Canyon Dam. And the 1992 Grand Canyon Protection Act has moved the operation of Glen Canyon Dam in a more environmentally sensitive direction and brought a new list of stakeholders to the table, and that's a good thing. An EIS was completed in 1995 on the operation of Glen Canyon Dam and a record of decision signed in 1996. As a result of the Glen Canyon EIS, an adaptive management program was implemented to comply with the consultation requirements of the Grand Canyon Protection Act. Ann Castle, well known to most everybody in this room and another more esteemed graduate of Colorado's Law School, and represents the Secretary on the Glen Canyon Dam Adaptive Management Work Group. The AMWIG makes recommendations to the Secretary on dam operations and other related actions associated with Glen Canyon Dam. To be frank, the collective set of issues associated with Glen Canyon Dam operations, power production, sediment through the Grand Canyon, tribal cultural interests, endangered species, those have been among the toughest we've had to deal with during the Obama administration. Nonetheless, Reclamation is committed to a set of ongoing actions to address those issues and is currently cooperating with a range of entities on 2 environmental assessments on Glen Canyon Dam operations. An experimental protocol for high flow releases from Glen Canyon Dam is expected to be done this summer. Similarly, we have an EA and a decision that we expect for non-native fish control, which should also be out this summer. Reclamation is also starting to work on an EIS involving a long-term experimental and adaptive management plan that will increase scientific understanding of the ecosystem below Glen Canyon Dam and continue the adaptive management program and the experiments that have been successfully implemented to date. Reclamation and the National Park Service are co-leads on this long-term EIS, and all agencies and tribes involved in the two EAs on Glen Canyon Dam operations will be formally invited to be cooperating agencies. The LTEMP will be the first EIS on Glen Canyon Dam since the 1996 Record of Decision, 1995 EIS. And those documents denoted the major demarcation point where we started addressing the resource needs in conjunction with the project purposes. These ESA programs, the LTEMP, and similar EIS efforts associated with operations at Flaming Gorge, Navajo, and the Aspinall unit are fundamental to our goals of certainty and sustainability on the river. So, that's an array of successes that I just outlined. But notwithstanding those successes, it's simply not enough. Simply not enough if we're to successfully navigate the future challenges that exist on the Colorado River. I mentioned earlier that there's a precarious balance between supply and demand, and that's going to get worse. Climate change, extended drought, or even mega drought, as Jonathan Peck so aptly discussed in a Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee hearing that we were both participating on about a month ago. Those raise the prospect of further stressing the system and threatening the collaborative approach that has defined recent times. As everyone knows, the 11-year period encompassing water years 2000 through 2010 on the Colorado River were the driest such period on record. Lake Powell and Lake Mead went from both being at 95% capacity in 2000 to Powell reaching its historic low in 2005 at 33% of capacity, and Mead reaching its historic low, 38% capacity, in November of last year. In that time, as you can imagine, every issue with a remote chance of affecting water supply in the Colorado River Basin was magnified in importance. But fortunately, we received a reprieve, at least for a year. Given the historic precipitation in the upper basin, we're projecting releasing approximately 12.5 million acre-feet from Lake Powell during the 2011 water year. This will raise Lake Mead by 33 feet over its historic low, so it reaches approximately 50% of capacity. Lake Powell will likely end the water year at about 71% of capacity. There are no doubt a lot of serious issues associated with that much water, particularly the flooding issues that we're now dealing on within the Colorado River Basin as well as elsewhere through the country. Nonetheless, this year's reprieve is much needed. Prior to this snowpack we received this year, there was a serious possibility of declaring the first ever shortage on the lower Colorado River Basin in 2012 under the interim guidelines. That possibility has now been deferred until at least 2015 and perhaps beyond. Future projections, however, necessitate that we make the best use of this reprieve. In late April, Reclamation released the first of its reports under the Secure Water Act, summarizing the projected impacts of climate change in each of the 8 major river basins in which Reclamation operates. In Colorado River Basin, the information we provided was really building on a lot of the previous reports, probably the most studied basin with respect to climate change, certainly in the country, maybe in the world. To summarize our findings, though, with respect to the Colorado River, the report projects, 1, a 5 to 6 degree Fahrenheit temperature increase basin-wide during the 21st century. That's on top of the 2 degrees Fahrenheit average increase that's already occurred. Precipitation. Oh, hello? More? All right, I'll move on. I didn't get gonged, did I? Either that or the parking police here. The second finding, precipitation increasing by 2.1% in the upper basin, but decreasing by 1.6% in the lower basin. And the third significant finding, that mean annual runoff would decrease by an average of 8.5%. I think I uttered 18, let me make clear, 8.5% basin-wide by 2050. And previous projections in those studies I mentioned earlier had ranged anywhere from 6% to 45%. These numbers, quite frankly, challenge the idea of certainty and sustainability. So what are we doing in response? First, we need to drill down a little bit deeper and understand the implications better. This is the purpose of our Basin Studies program. The Colorado River Basin Study was initiated in late 2009 and is being conducted collaboratively with the 7 basin states, with other entities participating, as part of the Secretary's Water Smart initiative. The study will define current and future imbalances in water supply and demand in the basin over the next 50 years. It will then develop and analyze adaptation and mitigation strategies to resolve those imbalances. The study contains 4 major phases: water supply assessment, water demand assessment, system reliability analysis, and development and evaluation of opportunities for balancing supply and demand. The first phase of the study was released this week. Terry Fulp has simply done an outstanding job in leading this effort, and he'll talk more about that later today. And hopefully I didn't take too much of your thunder there, Terry. Last week I did or 2 weeks ago I did a stakeholders meeting where I was supposed to present something, and my deputy commissioners were supposed to present 2 other things, and I completely forgot about it, and I presented the whole thing, and they just looked at me like, oh, you know, if you want to run the whole agency by yourself, you can do that too. In addition to the scientific work and planning in which we are engaged, we simply must continue to expand our engagement with parties that have significant interest in the Colorado River. We are doing this by continuing the Obama administration's active engagement on Indian water rights settlements. The President has signed into law 6 such settlements since taking office, which is simply an unprecedented number given that short of a time frame. 2 of those settlements, the Navajo San Juan and White Mountain Apache, will bring substantial benefits to those tribes, which is much important, and also will bring certainty to the other water users in the Colorado River Basin. Building upon that success, we are actively engaged with a number of Arizona parties and Senator Kyle on a Navajo-Hopi Little Colorado River settlement. Discussions are extremely active right now. I was in Phoenix yesterday getting briefed on that, and it's certainly possible that legislation will be introduced in this first session of Congress. Unfortunately, the House of Representatives does not appear to be as supportive of those important settlements. We are still waiting the details, but it appears that last week, while I was having fun in that Water and Power Subcommittee hearing, the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee was eliminating the $51 million we requested in the FY 2012 budget to implement recently enacted settlements. If that's the case, implementation will start to fall woefully behind schedule. So expanding our engagement brings me to our friends in Mexico. On many levels, Mexico is, and will continue to be, one of the most strategic, important partners to the United States. In the Colorado River Basin, we have a very strong relationship and are working closely to prepare for the significant challenges that both countries face. Just in the last year, through delicate diplomacy and active discussions involving Reclamation, the states, other U.S. parties, the International Boundary and Water Commission has signed 3 new minutes with Mexico that increase cooperation across the international boundary in a manner that respects and is consistent with the framework of the 1944 treaty between the 2 countries. Working through the IBWC and its Mexico counterpart, SILA, Mexico Reclamation, Conagua, and Mexican U.S. stakeholders have fostered a growing mutual trust with common goals for good water management. Minute 316 was the first of the agreements signed last year. It addressed our trial run of the Yuma desalting plant that successfully recycled 30,000 acre-feet of agricultural runoff that would otherwise have not been put to use by either U.S. or Mexican water users. Recycling this water and sending it to the river to be delivered to Mexico allowed us to conserve the same amount of water in Lake Mead, something of significant importance as we are approaching shortage conditions. The YDP pilot run was jointly funded by Reclamation, Metropolitan, CAWCD, and the Southern Nevada Water Authority. An important aspect of the YDP trial run was recognizing the important environmental resources of the Cienega de Santa Clara in Mexico. The 30,000 acre-feet of YDP treated water would have flowed to the Cienega if not treated as part of the trial run. Working together, the U.S., Mexico, and NGOs on both sides of the border were able to arrange for water flows to the Cienega that replaced the 30,000 acre-feet of treated water. The last agreement with Mexico, so far, was signed by the U.S. and Mexican commissioners in December 2010. Minute 318 allows for the temporary delay in the delivery of water allotted to Mexico under the 1944 treaty until repairs are made to infrastructure damaged by the April 2010 earthquake in the Mexicali Valley. In total, Mexico may adjust its delivery schedule downward from 2011 through 2013 by a total of up to 260,000 acre-feet if it cannot use its full allotment due to damaged irrigation infrastructure as a result of the earthquake. The water would be delivered to Mexico in subsequent years once repairs are made to its canals. And Mario delivered a presentation last week in Tijuana, and they're just doing terrific work in repairing those facilities and have made a lot of progress. I know there's a lot of work left to be done, but it was very impressive. In Tijuana last week, Mexico announced that it will likely store around 70,000 acre-feet of water this year, highlighting the value of reclamation storage infrastructure to both countries. The next step with Mexico is to discuss opportunities that could benefit both countries under a binational cooperative framework that was adopted in minute 317, which was the second of the 3 minutes. Discussions are active, and much work is now being done to determine whether an agreement or series of agreements can be developed next year that will implement joint projects in Mexico and increase operational certainty for both countries under the 1944 treaty. Being part of our discussions with Mexico has simply been one of the most enjoyable and rewarding experiences during my tenure as commissioner. They have a terrific team of water leaders. As I mentioned earlier, Mario Lopez of Conagua is one of those leaders, and we certainly wouldn't have made the progress we've had without Mario, with Commissioner Salmon, and the other members of the Mexican water team. I think we currently have the people in place, and I believe the necessary trust to use the reprieve we've received from the drought to develop the new tools and implement projects that will ensure that both countries can successfully navigate the future of the Colorado River. So let me close by saying that despite my familiarity with the laundry list of accomplishments that I just listed, it still amazes me, and it's breathtaking in its scope. Nonetheless, I recognize that the framework for collaboration that has become the norm in the basin is going to be put to the test by the challenges that lay ahead. I'll end, though, where I began. The tools and agreements in place in the Colorado River Basin will likely stand the test of time because of the broad support secured in their development. The people most effective in the basin have collectively taken charge and are defining their own future. This is a much better model than the one being pushed by a small number of politically powerful forces in the U.S. Congress as demonstrated by H.R. 1837. This is not the model for lasting solutions. Encouraging conflict by undermining agreements already in place is not good public policy. Trampling on state sovereignty, particularly in such a breathtaking and unprecedented manner, is not good public policy. Turning the clock back almost 20 years to rely on outdated science to guide actions today is not good public policy. Fortunately, none of that is being done in the Colorado River Basin. Trust, the ability to listen to others, and simple hard work have created the framework for present and future successes. As a result, conflict is less likely and a prosperous future more likely. Reclamation will continue to strongly support that approach. And we have a great team of leaders, as you all know, our regional directors, Larry Walkowiak, Lori Gray-Lee, Terry Fulp, our legal counsel, Bob Snow, an array of others who are here, which I'm not going to be able to list. Jane Harkins, I see Jane, has been terrific in our discussions. I'll stop there. We're all committed to the approach that's being taken in this basin. Maybe we're following, maybe we're leading. I don't know, we're participating, and that's the most important thing to me. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I've left it wide open for the two Pats to take me apart, but I welcome the dialogue.
Pat Mulroy, do you want to begin with comments?
I just get to pick any one of those things he just talked about. I agree. I agree with everything Mike said, and I think the most important challenge for us, actually it's not a challenge, it's an opportunity, is the emerging partnership with Mexico. And I think all 7 of us are committed as states to press forward on that. Like I said last night, I know that it's going to start uncovering some challenges we have amongst each other, but I think at the end of the day, we're going to come out of it stronger. In terms of Glen Canyon, I just have one thing to say: let our water go.
It sounds like that's going to happen this year, so.
I sure hope so.
Okay,
I can just leave and you two can.
Well, if you're going to quote famous lines, I guess, you want the water, you can't handle the water. As I was coming in this morning and thinking about the legacies of different commissioners, and knowing that some of this talk was going to be about Mexico this morning, or suspecting that it was, my thinking is that in the Colorado River Basin, where we had Secretary Norton and I think Commissioner was it Keys at that time, early in that period, and then Commissioner Johnson, we had the implementation of the QSA, we had the urging to go forward with the shortage agreement that became the 2007 document that we all talk about. under Secretary Norton and then Secretary Kempthorne, Commissioner Keys, Commissioner Johnson, and now with those things in the implementation phase, the real challenge on the river is Mexico. And that's the opportunity that Pat speaks of. I think that the importance of working with our neighbors in Mexico is not at all lost on the upper basin, just because we are not their immediate neighbors does not mean that anything that happens between the states and Mexico won't reverberate into the upper basin. And so I think the commissioner has really taken this opportunity by the horns, and I appreciate that very much. Reclamation is providing leadership and data and modeling and manpower to help us as states and other parties analyze the effects of anything we do that can impact the water that goes to Mexico and Mexico's use of water, but what they are owed. And it's simply, not only is it because there's an ocean down there that we will get some desalination benefits from, but it's simply the right thing to do. You've got to engage that last partner in the lower part of the river in a manner far more thoroughly than we ever have. It's not just, here's your water, go use it. So the ongoing work that's been done with the minutes that Commissioner Connor spoke of is great. It's simply setting the stage for a lot more work yet to be done. We met in Tijuana last week, and frankly, coming away from that, we did a lot of good things. We talked a lot about great projects, but we didn't finish putting the framework on what's going to take us forward. We still have to talk about shortage. We still have to talk about salinity. We still have to talk about hydrology, because all those things will frame what the other 5 or 6 or 8 or 2, whatever they are, projects underneath the umbrella will go forward. But I'll tell you, the projects are idling and ready to go. Whether it's desalination, conservation, getting some water out of the All-American Canal, they're all there. They're getting ready to be put into drawings and look for notice to proceed. But we do have other work to do before that notice can go, and we all know it. The states, I think, want to be at the table. We appreciate the fact that we are there and looked at as important contributors, because it's really our constituencies that will whine. And he was right, that was a quote. If anything we do has negative consequences. Now, that's not to say they won't have. We're all going to have to give a little bit. If you listened to Pat talk last night, she's exactly correct. We've only gotten as far as we have by giving at the margins. We've maintained our solid foundation in the law of the river, but we've made it work, and we'll continue to make it work with Mexico. And it's a pretty exciting time right now. If you've never been to an international meeting with the translators and the sobriety in the room, where it's a big deal. The commissioners, Commissioner Connor, Commissioner Salmon, Commissioner Ducina run a very impressive operation, and so it's exciting. And given all the laundry list of things the Commissioner went through on the river that are all important, I think right now for him and for us, it's our relationship with Mexico that's at the top of that list right now.
Okay, we want to open this up to the audience for questions. Maybe I'll start so you can be thinking of a question as we go along here. But I think we have a lot of people in the audience with familiarity with these issues, and so I hope you'll engage our panel here so that we can have a robust discussion. But let me start by just sort of building on something that both Pats have said. I think last night Pat Mulroy made what I thought was one of the more salient points about how the law of the river has seemingly softened over the 20 years or so that she's been working on this issue. We have always, I think, thought of the law of the river as being this ironclad, very tight-fisted, difficult set of laws to get around, and yet some of the agreements, some of the negotiations seem to have caused recognition among parties that they're not necessarily bound to the strict requirements of that law. The Upper Basin may have a slightly different take on this, but I'm just wondering if you all, maybe Mike or Pat, or either of the Pats could sort of share their perspective on where we're going with the law of the river, whether it is something that we can allow to evolve in a more flexible way.
Well, I think it will continue to evolve, and it needs to evolve in a flexible way. But there's some basic fundamental framework and parameters there that we know are kind of inviolate on the law of the river. But I think in recognition of the many challenges that we face and the opportunities that have to exist between the states, between the basins, my sense is that it's not necessarily that there's been so much more additional flexibility read into the law of the river as I think some of the historic interpretations were rather rigid. And maybe that was inappropriate at a certain time, and now we're just exploring with the products coming out of a fine institution like this, exploring the parameters of flexibility that exists within the agreements and having it evolve, but there's a limit to how much it can evolve, quite frankly. And even in the minutes that we signed with Mexico last year, we ran up against some of those basic fundamental inviolate principles, and those are still things we're going to have to try and address as we go forward and try and develop the broader minutes that I think we're looking at this year.
I agree with Mike, and it's the same principle that holds true in so many venues. If it can't be flexible, it'll break. I mean, rigidity, especially in the face of climate change and the challenges that's going to bring. If this, and the law of the river is that partnership. It's that foundational document of partnership between the 7 states. If it cannot adapt, if it cannot bend, if it cannot become accommodating to new conditions, it will break on its own weight. So the resilience of that and brilliance of those original agreements and those underpinning laws that Mike talked about come to fore when you see that it is adaptable, that it is flexible.
Well, I think we've made it flexible. We have watched the drought in the southeast, and we watched the Bay Delta. And you come home and you look in the mirror and you say, we got to make ours work, because there, but for the grace of us, we go. I mean, Mike will be up here, the commission will be reading about a bill, a House bill or a Senate file in Washington that is going to solve this problem for us.
Oh, goody.
And that's enough for me to want to work under the law that we have. And it's not just Congress. You have legal decisions in the Bay Delta that are not that shiny either. So, you know, you don't have to look very far to say, you know, maybe I'll keep driving this car for a while. And I don't think, well, we have agreed, the states have agreed over the years to not push on each other's sore spots. We know they're still there. We know that we've saved them for another day. But we get to an answer without, we can whine and fight and give each other black eyes occasionally. I can buy Pat dinner and then she just yells at me. But that's as bad as it gets. And if you got to take one for the team, to make this thing work, then I think that's a smart way to go.
All right, let's open it up to the audience. I want to find her. Good.
Hi, Mike. Kimmery Wiltshire, Carpe Diem West. There's a lot of important eggs in the basin study basket. When that basket lands on your desk next summer, what happens with all that work and study? Where does it go next within reclamation and possibly in the halls of Congress?
Well, as with everything, I expect that there will be a collective set of widely supported projects, actions that will come out of the study that will, address the imbalances that are being identified as part of the study that will probably need some resources to implement. So to those things, whether it be in the realm of more operational ideas that we can implement, I think we roll up our sleeves and make sure we get down to the details of negotiating and talking through those operating mechanisms that we need to put in place, whether they're projects. A lot of that, quite frankly, we would like to partner up, we, the Bureau of Reclamation, or the federal government, partner up in as many ways as we can and try to facilitate a lot of on-the-ground actions. Given the budget situation that we have currently, and I have to say, I've got great, outstanding support from the Assistant Secretary, from the Deputy Secretary, from the Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar. It's a joy to work in this Interior Department as the Commissioner of Reclamation because of the support. So we're doing all we can, and our budget has probably not been hit as hard. You look at a 5% reduction in budget. It's not as dramatic as some other agencies, which are in double digit. But that just shows you there's only so much we can do. We're all going to have to look for resources when we have to do on-the-ground activities, more in the way of conservation, more in the way of efficiency, more in the way of environmental restoration. So there's some resiliency to the environment as we try and maintain water use and power production at the levels people have come to rely on. So it's going to be difficult to move through that implementation phase, but the whole value of the study is to better understand where we need to focus our efforts, to prioritize, and to get together and then move to that next step of implementation.
Hi, Margaret Bowman with the Walton Family Foundation. Mike, I enjoyed your talk, and I really do like the contrast between what's going on now in the Colorado and what's happening out in the Bay Delta. In my mind, one of the big differences between the two is in the Bay Delta, their backs are up against the wall with the Endangered Species Act. And here in the Colorado River Basin, there's still water flowing through a lot of streams that are preventing additional Endangered Species Act listings, and also supporting one of the major industries in the region with recreation and tourism. What is the Commission going to do and the 7 basin states going to do to make sure that those in-stream flows stay and aren't just Endangered Species Act motivated flows, but flows that protect the recreation and tourism industry and prevent additional ESA listings, to prevent the kind of bad management that is just based on endangered species?
That's a very, very good, tough question. We were having a meeting, Ann Castle and I, last week with the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Ministry in Australia that has responsibility for water. And they have all these planning authorities and statutes. Absent the Secure Water Act, which isn't really a pure planning statute, we haven't taken an approach to kind of this comprehensive view of water. We've kind of put it together in bits and pieces here and there. So I think, fundamentally, how do you try and address the water, power, recreation, environmental needs? The Basin Studies Program is one mechanism to do that, probably our best mechanism to do that, quite frankly. And now we started with 3. I think by the end of this year we'll be probably up to 15 or so basin studies. So we're starting to attack this on a basin by basin basis. But I think that's the approach that you need to look at the overall, and I think that's part of the process, not in all the studies, but in some of the studies, is look at the overall health and needs of the environment, not just related to endangered species. Because quite frankly, you're right. Reclamation started with a project-by-project approach, and then we deal with the environment on a project-by-project basis, and we haven't taken a more holistic look. Just as our responsibility, I think there's been a demand, certainly I noted it during my time in the Senate, there was a demand for Reclamation's mission to evolve, not that it had responsibility for broad-based water planning, but that it could come to the table and provide tools to work with the states and water users in specific basins to look at these issues more broadly and try and do a better job of planning for the future. So I think basin studies, I think our Water Smart grant programs where we rely on people to come to us and say, we've got a group together, habitat conservation, environmental restoration are one of the authorized set of activities. We can start doing that because it improves overall health. That's taking care of candidate species is an authorized use of those funds and those grants. So we're bits and pieces we're moving out to try and address the great need that you identify, because those economic interests dependent upon the health of our rivers, et cetera, are becoming just as important economic benefits as anything else that we do.
Down here.
Hi, Kevin Wheeler with Water Balance Consulting. I want to build on with a question that Mark asked. Terry yesterday really outlined well the well-known supply-demand curve, and Pat gave a wonderful presentation on the critical need, the willingness to collaborate to make some of those hard decisions. Pat also talked about the need to start thinking outside the box, to come up with solutions, possibly fuzzying leaf area, I believe is what she said, finding flexibility to do things that we can agree on. Now, many of us spent the last several days in a workshop sponsored by the University of Arizona talking about the need for adaptive management. Yet we live within a compact that's static in nature, with some good concepts, but with some poorly informed science. Is it time to take a look at the compact itself to find a solution that takes a more truly adaptive management approach that can handle future projections that are forthcoming, perhaps a demand that's a function of supply to the best known information up to date?
Great question.
I've got my head down, I'm writing.
I'll take that one. And the answer is no. And I'll tell you why. The answer is no, because of everything we've said that the compact has shown itself adaptable. And that it really allows 7 states to do what 7 states can agree to do. If you were to go in right now into all the nuances of the compact, we would waste so much time and energy fighting over things for which there are no solutions. You can't roll back the clock to 1922, but for one, let me give you one example. I think one of the things we've done is the agreements between the states have already built in that concept of adaptation. They're not in perpetuity anymore. They're for 25 years. They have to be reviewed. They're going to have to change as conditions change. The way we're approaching it. But I'd hate to see us undermine that foundational concept of the compact, which is no matter how big you are as a state, no matter how small you are as a state, we are equal partners. There's no way for us to even be able to forge that next generation of partnership with Mexico if we start arguing over things in the compact that are political non-starters. They're not going to get us anywhere. That's why I say use it as a foundation as long as the compact is pliable, as long as it is adaptable and can work within the needs of the 7 states and all the partners and the 2 countries that share the Colorado River. Leave it alone. It's not worth the energy and the heartbreak.
Go ahead,
Oh.
Mike.
I agree with Pat.
That's
I don't
one.
want to, although, I get to elaborate here a little bit. I don't think you want to mess with the compact. If you want to rewrite parts of Arizona v. California, knock yourself out. I mean, that's okay with me. But
Now.
just seeing if she's listening. So there we go. No, what's interesting is when I took the job about 10 years ago, it was always the lower basin will tell you they want to get out of the compact because they want more water. Nothing could be further from the truth in the last 10 years that we've worked together. Every one of the states enjoys that compact as a floor for common understanding and what we can do. And let's not forget what all we've been able to do. And this goes to the previous question too about the environmental and ecological benefits more than just for endangered species. If you go back 20 years or further, between dealing with sediment now and high flow experiments, we have reoperation of Flaming Gorge and Aspinall. We've got settlements that we've dealt with. We have an endangered fish recovery program where, for heaven's sake, and this is the conundrum of the basin, we're trying to get fish to breed in one creek and we're killing non-natives in another. So what's the, you know, those are the kinds of things you have to deal with in the basin. There's just so many interwoven outcomes. But non-natives right now, the trout, the bass, the pike, and the catfish are the biggest threat to recovery of the natives that we have. So it puts you in a very awkward situation and I'm a trout fisherman, and here I am part of a program that says we've got to get rid of trout. That's just one small example of a way that we've been able to make this law work for us and meet, not to everybody's satisfaction, but to a consensus approach that we can go forward and meet the needs of the residents of the basin.
I think, see, Floyd Dominy would have taken this opportunity, just to be honest, to disagree, and I'm not Floyd Dominy. So I agree. I would just say, I think Pat was very insightful in just saying, look at what the interim surface guidelines, the interim guidelines of 2007, everything is interim because adaptive management, as far as those operational regimes and structures and mechanisms, are intended to be revisited. One of the things that we've talked about, quite frankly, with Mexico, we don't have to decide everything in perpetuity. We've got a lot of tough issues, and maybe that's the approach, to get some operational certainty as we do the best job we can to craft something that benefits both countries, but that we revisit it at the appropriate time. It seems to be a model that works. Also, with respect to something this Pat said earlier, which was also very insightful, what goes on right now is to not hit each other's sore spots. And so you work on solutions that you can work around, that everybody can try and find some common ground in moving forward. You go back into the compact, immediately what comes to the surface is those sore spots, and people saying, well, I'm not going to live with that for the next, what's it been, 80 plus years, 90 years or so. So I think you just the whole process would bring you back to those very tough, knotty issues that are going to just polarize people and not lead to the success and the progress that's been made.
Let me push the panel on that answer. I think it's a really interesting question, and I'd like to push you a little bit in this way. As I read the compact, it essentially mandates that the upper basin deliver a certain amount of water over a 10-year rolling average to the lower basin, 75 million acre feet, and of course the part of Mexico's share. And so the problem is not so much with the sort of agreement, but I wonder if you all see flexibility in that obligation that the upper basin has. The concern, you don't see it expressed very often by the upper basin, but the concern that the upper basin could have is that if we get past this high water year and it turns out we have more low water years coming down, that the upper basin bears the brunt of the shortages, the long-term shortages, I guess, that we suffer. So do you see flexibility in the upper basin's obligation to deliver 75 million acre feet on a rolling average of over 10 years?
We already did it. In the reoperating of Powell and Meade, we have certain trigger elevations in Meade and Powell to balance those two reservoirs. In exchange, the lower basin said for the next 25 years, we won't make a call.
You won't make a call.
That's how you work around it. Took that issue right off the table. And if we want our lawyers to fight about it, we can. But we'll never, I'll be Herb Gunter right now, and I will just do this. It didn't get us anywhere.
Fair enough.
Can I respond? Sure. First of all, I don't think we have a delivery obligation. I think we have an obligation not to deplete. If
Not
you-
to what?
Not to deplete. If you read the words in the compact, it says you won't deplete the flow at Leaf Ferry below an average of 75 million in 10. Now, these are the kinds of words that our lawyers will ultimately fight over. And then she's got 8 points. So if Mother Nature doesn't bring it in the first place and we still have perfected rights that are protected, I think that there is a scenario where you can get less than 75 in 10. I hope we don't ever see it, Pat, honestly. Below Leaf Ferry that would be in compliance with the compact. So that's how I read it. And so I think that it's not a delivery obligation. It's a non-deplete clause. Now on the sore spot or the we won't call for 25 years, that's true. And I think we probably gave the sleeves out of our vest in that particular case because I'm not sure they can call to begin with. And the reason I say that...
Keep picking at the sore.
The reason I say that is because if you were at the Upper Colorado Commission meeting yesterday and work in those environs, that commission has a duty, I believe, as the Upper Basin states, not to ever get in that situation where the call or the lawsuit or the whatever it is you want to call it comes flying up at us from the Lower Basin ever even happens, because we are required under the later compact not to let that get to that point. We have to curtail ourselves, and if we are doing the right things, and that's the dark side of the compact. We all like operating when there's a lot of water, but the other compact says we will curtail. How that's going to happen is the subject of a lot of work that's going on right now internally in those 4 states. But that tells me that it's our job to police ourselves so that this call that I don't think can happen, but Pat thinks does or can, believe me, if it comes in the way that of a lawsuit, it's the same thing. And so
It's not going to get us anywhere.
it's not going to get us anywhere. But I don't think we get there if the Upper Basin does their job. That's my point. I think we do our job to keep that water in the river and to comply so that we don't push that over the tipping point.
But I think that's a balanced requirement. I mean, there's also an obligation on the Lower Basin to curtail as the whole system starts contracting. And I think that recognition came about through those shortage agreements in 2007. Now, if we get down to real serious elevations, are the tires going to have to be kicked on that whole issue? Yeah. But what you really have is a curtailment across the basin, between the work the Upper Basin's doing, the work the Lower Basin's doing. The entire basin is curtailing.
Well, on those positive notes, there's an air of diplomacy here that I think is an important one. I hope we can maintain it over the next couple of days. Let's thank our panel, and we can take a break.